So what does eldership mean? It's a great question. So from the process-oriented paradigm, it really means, you know, a way of being that can encompass everything with equal value. So behind that is the meta skill of deep democracy, which is a big thing in process work that we look at. You know, this ability to value each part of the field as well as the field as a whole, to value it equally, and to be able to support all the parts regardless of my personal position or bias. So being the elder means recognizing my opinion, my view, and then not allowing that to influence the way I might engage with the whole field. So recognizing that my experience is just one part of a much larger field that holds within it many different parts, opinions, ways of being, and actions. You know, I've had moments of being in that place of eldership, and it feels completely relieving and effortless in that it reminds me of this, you might know, Owen, the saying of the seventh Zen patriarch, I think, that the way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. And this is what eldership reminds me of. It's sort of that amazing ability to recognize and support all of what makes up the whole experience, as well as the whole experience, as well as myself in there too. So it's a wonderful, I guess, meta skill to hold, the meta skill of deep democracy. And how to apply it as a facilitator is very much an integral part of our work, not only in groups or relationships, but also internally with parts of myself. So that's often the biggest challenge, right? Is, can I accept myself for all of my parts, even the ones that I'm averse to or I react to? But if I can get into the position of the elder, I'm able to embrace all of myself with acceptance. Very something to aspire towards, right? I think very few of us holds that on an ongoing basis. And even though we step into it, it doesn't last. We get triggered in other situations, and then we lose the eldership there.
So what you're saying is the eldership, my eldership might arise in certain contexts, certain areas, and then other contexts, my eldership, oh, I'm not there with my eldership, but somebody else might be.
Somebody else might be, and I might be aware of being hooked by something in that field, in that context, that detracts from my eldership. And then the beauty of that awareness is that I can then go away and work on that issue, work on myself, burn my wood in that area, so that hopefully when next I encounter that dynamic, I'll have a little more expansive eldership then because of my inner work. And one other thing I just want to say there, I don't know if this is relevant, but I was just thinking about eldership in the context of other cultures, you know, and just want to notice that in indigenous cultures, that term means something different, in that it also includes a certain status in the community. The person who's the elder is seen as the wise one, the guide, the spiritual advisor for the community. And so it has that extra component too, but we don't really specify that in process work, even though holding a position of eldership implies that. I mean, it is for the growth of the community, for the guidance of the community, but we don't necessarily make that as an agenda as part of eldership.
Why is it needed more now than perhaps ever before, and certainly in our communities?
I personally don't see now as being any different to the human dilemma for eons. I think the cycle that we're in, except for the climate crisis, is somewhat different now. But, the cycle of war and oppression and suffering and refugees and genocides and all of that has been going on forever. So in some form. And of course, where communities and societies and nations get polarized against each other, how can we still keep that position of eldership in viewing that upheaval? And not, even though we might favor one side over another, are we still able to recognize each role, each component as valuable in some way in its own right? So, and that Ani says this a lot, can we embrace the dictator, the oppressor, the warlike energy? Can we find it in ourselves so that in connecting with it and transforming it through our own work, by doing that, we help the larger field also go a little further in the polarization. So here's the holographic idea of each part reflecting the whole and all of that. So I think that's very valuable for communities and, as I said, societies, nations. But as human beings, most of us are very far from that. If we look at the Russian-Ukrainian situation at the moment, and I'm not condoning Putin at all, but Putin is vilified for what he and his army is doing. But then in entering that fray, people get so against whatever Russia stands for in the moment that they forget, okay, it's one expression of the whole field and it exists everywhere in everybody. How can we address it in a way that doesn't send it underground and then result in it exacerbating and becoming worse? So very, very needed for eldership to come into conflict and to help the parts who are against each other recognize each in the other. And then in the larger context, how do all of us recognize that vindictive, violent, aggressive part in ourselves and somehow work with it to make it useful in a transformative way? The emphasis in process work is so much on hearing all the voices and making space for them, recognizing the core of what's trying to be expressed through each voice.
So in other words, this applies not just to a global scene, it's also on a daily seemingly small things.
Yeah.
If left accumulate until finally we have, wars seem to appear suddenly, but they're usually a long time in the making.
Yeah, they boil away until eventually they explode, because there isn't that opportunity to be heard. And we see that in families, right? In small groups, communities, social groups, all of that polarization gets so stuck and so many stalemates there. But one thing also, in addition to hearing the voices and helping to go deeper in understanding the other part, is appealing to people's eldership. So in other words, reminding, if possible, and reminding people about their high dream, and appealing to their eldership, their ability to contribute, to co-create the high dream with others. That sometimes can work too, especially if people are unconscious of their rank and they're suddenly reminded of that and about what they might do for the good of the whole from that position of rank, you know, their own enclave or their own little social group. I just wanted to add one thing that I thought of is, you know, the elder, as we see in group process, the elder can be identified as the facilitator of the situation in the moment, but the elder, the figure of the elders, can often emerge just in one individual who's not even seen as holding that position. You know how in group process somehow toward the end somebody steps in and sort of says just the right thing that de-escalates everybody and brings the thing to a whole. That, so the eldership can emerge in anybody in any moment. I wanted to add that too. I think that's important.
But it's also, yes, it's important on these large global happenings, but it's also really important on the much smaller granular level within communities.
In community, in relationship too, it's always so challenging, especially in long-term relationships, close partner relationships, you know, when there are issues that cycle and recur and things do get polarized, how to be the elder there too can be very challenging.
And I'm also thinking about how eldership's important. Often what happens is that there are great schemes and ideas to do things and they begin to happen, but then it's the exclusion of the blocker or the perceived enemy.
Yeah, the enemy.
And how that in fact stalls the whole process. And it's really, eldership is an invitation to bring all sides in.
I think the fear often, you know, talking about that, it's so compelling that this is where inner work becomes so important, that if we can work on our fear or trauma histories or belief systems, we can loosen up that fear block, the blockage you're talking about, and make it more permeable. And one way that that can happen is, you know, the people recognize the humanness of others and the pain that is shared. You know, everybody has some degree of pain and sorrow. That can be a connecting factor, and then that dispels the polarization.
Thanks, Ingrid. I really appreciate you doing that.